Welcome, dear students. This session focuses on English as a lingua franca. I hope and expect that by the end of this session, you would be able to understand the meaning of the term and you would also understand the status of English as a lingua franca in today's world. Well, my dear students, a language that is adopted as a common language between the speakers whose native languages are different is called a lingua franca. In other words, when speakers who have their native language or first language as something different, but for common everyday use, for communication, or for practical functioning of life, when they use a language for connectivity or for the practical purposes, that is called a lingua franca. The concept is not new. If we trace the history back, Arabic was a lingua franca in the Islamic world. In fact, from 733 AD to 1792 AD, these were the times when Arabic was the major language of the world. It was a lingua franca of the world, the Islamic world particularly, because Islam was spreading and, after all, the areas that were being conquered, and people were being, included in the Muslim, state, Arabic was spreading. Also, we need to notice that this spread was not limited to any smaller region. Rather, this was from China to northern India through Central Asia, Persia, Asia Minor, Middle East to North Africa. So, a lot of area of the globe was covered by those who used Arabic as a lingua franca. The term lingua franca was actually first coined by Italians, and it was in the beginning of the 17th century that the term was for the first time used. It was primarily used, for the language that was used, Italian language that was being used at that time as a language of commerce. And actually this was being used all across Europe, Italian with, a bit of, I would say, Arabic, a bit of Portuguese, a bit of French language, but mainly Italian that would have some words of these languages. The term literally means Frankish language, as Frank was a common designation for all the Western Europeans since approximately 12th century. So, it was called the Frankish language because it was being used as a language that was common for communication amongst the people in the whole Europe. Today, when we look at the world, it has turned into what generally we call it, a global world. Of course, with this, increase in traveling, with this improvement in the media, with this in means of communication and transportation, where people have come closer, there is an obvious need today for a common language or for a lingua franca. So what I want to say is that though the concept is old, in today's world, we find that English has emerged as a language that has rightly gained the status of a lingua franca, and it is only in the 20th century, since, it is from 1950s onwards that we particularly notice this term being used for English. There are certain socio-political factors working behind all this. The Chief International Forum for Political Communication, that is the United Nations, it dates only from 1945. And this is where the political leaders from everywhere from the world would come together, and they need a language where they can, exchange their ideas and thoughts, and they can talk and they can decide things using one language, one common language as a medium. And, it's very interesting that initially there were only 51 members, the states who were members in 1945. However, the number increased, and in 1960 it had become, it had risen to over 80 members. The increase continued steadily in 1990s, and in 2003, 191 countries are members of UN. Now, if you notice this speed where, people are gathering together, representatives of different countries are gathering together on a bigger, mainly political, but also, of course, social platform, you can understand the need for the dire need, I would say, for a language that is common. The need for lingua franca and, the pressure to create one that would be used by all these people to, have conversations and discussions and to, continue with the functions of life, across the globe. It has been felt very, it has been felt through the times because the other alternative, the only other possibility is multi-way translations, which, of course, are very impractical, which are also very expensive. The question is where English as a lingua franca is used. In fact, it is being used in the whole Europe, where, from Frenchmen to German to everybody, for communicating with the rest of the world, they are using English. English as a lingua franca, or as we use the abbreviation, ELF plays an important role in former Anglophone colonies such as in India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Uganda, Zimbabwe, etc. Well, ELF differs from standard English in a number of ways because, there are regional varieties. As you move from one country to the other, you would find there are certain similarities, but there are certain differences in these varieties, and the variance exists. Variances are of different times. For example, there is a variety in the use of articles, or even sometimes in some varieties of, where English is used as a lingua franca, you would find that no article is used as such. Variances are also found in terms of the usage of prepositions. Sometimes the unique use of morphemes such as importancy and smoothfully. Notice these two examples. Smoothfully or importancy are not the words that we otherwise, use. But you would find them being used at certain places. Now, because of, it being used everywhere in their own ways, the ways people would use it, of course, there are a lot of varieties and there would be certain contradictions as well, which has led to some criticism. The criticism is that though this is a useful mode of communication, but it is a form of linguistic imperialism as well. It's more like creating a hegemony or more like creating a control over the world through language. Speakers of ELF may eventually speak both their native language and English, and they would speak both of these imperfectly. This is another criticism that is made on the use of English as a lingua franca. Despite all this criticism, what I would say is that ELF continues to flourish in many countries, oftentimes enriching the language with all the colorful, idiom, with all the unique and novel uses, and the usage that we find across the globe.